There is a sentence most people in the Western world learned before they could question it. It opens the Bible. It opens the Torah. For 2,000 years, it has been read as the definitive statement of how everything began. But there is a problem, and it lives inside the very first word. Not a theological problem, not a matter of faith or interpretation, a grammatical one. The first word of Genesis is Bereshit. Every major translation renders it the same way. In the beginning. The King James, the New International Version, Jerome's Latin Vulgate from the 4th century. They all open with the same absolute statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. A point zero. The start of everything. Nothing before, nothing outside. The problem is that this reading requires something the Hebrew text does not provide. For Bereshit to mean in the beginning as an absolute, a closed, definitive moment, Hebrew grammar requires the definite article, ba-reshit. With the article, you have a fixed point in time. Without it, you have something structurally different, what grammarians call a construct state. A construct state does not stand alone. It introduces a relationship of dependency. It is not in the beginning, full stop. It is in the beginning of. An open phrase. A temporal clause waiting for the rest of the sentence to give it meaning. Imagine picking up a book and reading the first line, at the start of. Your mind immediately asks, the start of what? That is the question the Hebrew text is actually asking, and it has been asking it for 3,000 years. This is not a fringe theory. It is not modern revisionism dressed as scholarship. In the 11th century, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, known as Rashi, the most widely read Jewish biblical commentator in history, opened his commentary on Genesis with exactly this observation. The first word, he wrote, cannot be read as an independent statement. The grammar does not allow it. The verse is a temporal clause. When God began to create, the earth was already a formless void. Rashi was not troubled by this. For the Jewish interpretive tradition, the question of what existed before creation was less urgent than the question of what the act of creation meant. The grammar was simply the grammar. The reading that became dominant in Christian tradition, in the beginning, period, full stop, nothing before, did not come from the Hebrew. It came from a decision made in Latin. And that decision had consequences that shaped the next 2,000 years of theology. If the first verse is a temporal clause, when God began to create, then verse 2 is not what came after creation. It is the condition that was already there when God began. And the earth was Tohu and Vavohu, and darkness was upon the face of the Tehom. 3 terms, each one carrying more weight than the translation suggests. Tohu and Vavohu appears elsewhere in the Hebrew scriptures, and never in an abstract sense. In Isaiah, it describes a city after total annihilation. In Jeremiah, it describes a vision of the world in reverse. Light gone, order collapsed, the land returned to what it was before human habitation. Tohu and Vavohu is not a technical term for nothingness. It is the word for devastation, for a landscape where life cannot take hold. And then there is Tehom, the deep, the primordial abyss. Linguists have noted for over a century that Tehom shares its root with Tiamat, the chaos dragon of the Babylonian creation myth. In that story, the cosmos is built from the body of a defeated monster. The abyss is not neutral. It has a name. It has a history. What is significant is this: the Tehom is never created. Read the text carefully. There is no verse in Genesis that says, "And God created the deep." The abyss is present at the opening of the narrative. The divine action happens above it, over it, through it, but never before it. If creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, is not in the text of Genesis, where did it come from? The scholarly consensus is unusually clear on this point. The doctrine appears explicitly for the first time in the second book of Maccabees, written in Greek in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Not a cosmological treatise, not an exegesis of Genesis. A theological argument made in a moment of extreme duress. The Church Fathers developed it into doctrine. The context was polemical. Gnostic traditions held that matter was eternal and corrupted. To counter that claim, Orthodox theologians needed a God with no raw material, no constraints, no prior conditions. It was a philosophically coherent position. It was also a reading that required importing Greek metaphysical assumptions into a Hebrew text that had not asked those questions. Jerome's Vulgate rendered Bereshit as in principio, in the beginning, absolute, unambiguous, closed. Later translators followed Jerome, and for centuries, the Hebrew original was accessible only to a small scholarly elite. The grammar that Rashi had noted in the 11th century did not reach most readers of the Bible until the modern period. What the Hebrew text of Genesis actually offers is something more unsettling, and in some ways more interesting than the doctrine that replaced it. A God who begins by organizing chaos is not a lesser God, but it is a different kind of God, one who works with resistance, one whose act of creation is not a declaration into emptiness, but a sustained effort against disorder. Order in this reading is not the natural state of things. It is something built, something held together. The abyss does not disappear when the light is spoken into existence. It is pushed back, covered, organized, but it is still there, under the surface of the text, under the surface of everything. What changed? What creatio ex nihilo changed was not the text. It was the question the text was allowed to ask. The grammar of Bereshit leaves us with a specific problem. If the first verse is a temporal clause, and the second verse describes a pre-existing chaos, a wasteland, an abyss, a darkness that was already there, then the creation story does not begin with nothing. It begins with something that refused to be nothing. The text does not tell us where the Tehom came from. It does not ask the question. For the ancient Hebrew imagination, that may not have been the point. But for anyone reading this text now, after 2,000 years of a doctrine built to answer that question by making it disappear, the silence where that answer should be is not empty. It is the most interesting thing in the room. In the next episode, we follow that silence further. The Tehom has a parallel in a Babylonian text that predates Genesis by centuries. And what that parallel suggests about who wrote Genesis, when, and why is something the tradition has preferred to keep at the level of academic discussion. We are going to take it out of the seminar room. The doctrine that God created from nothing was built to answer a question the Hebrew text never asked. Does that change anything for you? Or does the act of bringing order to chaos feel like a more honest picture of how things actually work? Leave it in the comments. And if you want to follow where this goes next, subscribe. The next episode takes the abyss out of the seminar room.